Hello, and welcome to Reality Remix, the podcast, episode 1. I'm your host, Dale Jensen, and an item in the news that you might have missed a week ago is Oregon, air quotes, accidentally releases the vaccination status for 40,000 state employees. Privacy? What privacy? And we move into Reality Remix. For those of you who are new, Reality Remix was a discussion show that streamed back in 2013 and 2014, and which featured topics, both current and past, on a vast array of subjects. We intend to do the same here, with new content Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. The crew for each show may vary, but you can always rest assured of interesting topics that will inform, enlighten, and entertain you. If you like what you hear, please consider subscribing with the notification bell on. That way you'll know when we've posted new content. It doesn't cost anything, and it will really help out the channel, so thank you in advance. With me in the studio for this show are Dennis from Ohio.
Hi, Dale. This is Dennis. I'm in Ohio, and that stuff going on in Oregon, releasing the status of their employees, whether they're vaccinated or not, doesn't that kind of paint a bullseye on their back?
Yeah, exactly. And it's, was it intentional? Was it deliberate to, get at the people who are not vaccinated? Who knows? But that's Oregon for you. Also with me is Solomon, who is also from Ohio.
Nice to be here too.
Great. And Mel, who is in Michigan.
Hi, Dale. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Glad to have you. Episode 1, Cruising with COVID. Last week saw the sad news that former Secretary of State Colin Powell had passed away from complications of COVID-19. The four-star general had worked in the administration of 3 presidents and was considered a leading candidate for the office at one time, but ultimately chose not to throw his hat into the ring, though he received 3 electoral college votes in 2016 from faithless electors in Washington state, placing him 3rd in that race. In comments from Powell's family following his death, they seemed to make a point of declaring that he was fully vaccinated at the time of his passing, though it wasn't clear whether he'd had a booster or not. And it's important to point out that he was being treated for multiple myeloma, a form of blood cancer, as well as early-stage Parkinson's disease. So even with the vaccine, he had issues, and that's probably ultimately what killed him. But it brings up a point, which I've been saying since, probably March 2020. We are never going to be rid of COVID. What was unleashed on us from Wuhan, China in 2019, COVID-19, by the way, is named the way it is, for CO, corona, V, virus, ID, infectious disease, and 19 for 2019, will be with humanity for the foreseeable future. There is no magic pill, there is no 100% effective vaccine, and there is no mandating the virus out of existence. I want to make something abundantly clear at this point. I am not anti-vaccination. I am in fact fully vaccinated since April. Got an early immunization because of my asthma. In a time of vaccine shortages, I got an appointment an hour and a half away in Jacksonville because I thought it important to get the jab because of my underlying condition. I stayed up past midnight, constantly refreshing a browser screen looking for anything within a couple of 100 miles from my home until the Jacksonville Walmart appointment popped up. But what I am not is pro-tyranny. If you don't want to get a vaccine, don't get one. I don't really care. Keeping me, as a vaccinated person, from getting infected is not your job, contrary to what the President of the United States claims. No, it's actually the job of the vaccine. If you get infected after declining the shot, well, that's on you. So where does that leave us? I think that everyone, with some perverse exceptions, wants to get back to normal, which means life before the pandemic. And I'm sorry to say that's probably never going to happen because COVID is never going to go away. There will always be another variant, another outbreak here or there, and so long as we remain frightened by a virus that seems to move with impunity across the landscape, we will face some level of control which prevents going back to normal. My wife and I love to travel. It's one of the releases that both of us appreciate, and we took a bit of a mental and emotional hit from the pandemic shutdown. Even though we live in Florida, which wasn't super impacted by lockdowns, we still couldn't travel and had to cancel a number of trips planned for 2020. Unlike our typical week-long trip to Disney and 3 cruises, it was a hodgepodge of weekends at Disney and a series of airplane trips to the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Jamaica, all of which were explorations of how different countries dealt with the pandemic. The Dominican Republic, which was our first trip in November 2020, was pretty loose, while a couple of trips to Mexico and Jamaica were typical of the current state of conditions in Florida. We have another trip scheduled for 2022 in Jamaica at the resort we stayed at. It was a really good experience. But we're really cruisers at heart. And where does that leave us? In March 2020, the cruise industry shut down in the United States, indeed worldwide. It would not start to recover domestically until June 2021, and even that was a very weak reopening with just a couple of ships getting going. Personally, we joined in during early August, setting sail on a 5-day cruise out of Port Canaveral on the Carnival Magic. The conditions, which were largely those that we had experienced pre-COVID of that cruise, didn't last much longer, as cruise lines adjusted to the increased presence of the Delta variant. But we took another cruise in October 2021 on Royal Caribbean, and here are the conditions that make cruising, in my opinion, the safest form of travel in the United States during the age of COVID, which, again, will likely last forever. Ahead of the cruise, we needed to check in online, affirming that we're both fully vaccinated, which again, we've been for months. If you're not vaccinated, meaning either you're a kid or you're a holdout, there are a few openings because they are required by the Centers for Disease Control to sail with 95% passengers vaccinated. And if you or your kids fit into that percentage, you're good. Otherwise, you're going to be denied boarding. Once accepted, we were given a boarding time. In the past, boarding times were kind of irrelevant, but we've been advised that it's now strictly enforced. So we timed our drive to Port Canaveral to get us there at the proper time, which we pretty much hit. Because of that, going through in-person check-ins, security, and boarding were super easy in essentially empty terminals. So what's on board? During boarding, since we showed our vaccination cards, we were given wristbands to wear throughout the cruise, allowing crew members to quickly sort out the vaccinated from those who weren't. So what's on board? First of all, you have to wear a mask. That's the default. Unless the following conditions apply, you wear a mask. 1, you're in your cabin. That's pretty obvious. 2, you're on a deck that is outside. The pool deck, other decks that are outside, the promenade. 3, you're either eating or drinking, so seated in a bar or in a restaurant. Or 4, you're in a venue or show that has been marked as vaccinated only. As noted, there are places and shows which are marked as vaccinated only and which non-vaccinated passengers are not welcome to attend. In those shows and areas, vaccinated guests can take off the mask at all times. On our October cruise, we pretty much stuck to those areas. Secondly, there were significant reductions in the capacity of the ship. During one evening introduction, the cruise director mentioned that the ship had 1,200 crew members, but less than 1,000 passengers. He joked, "Welcome to your private yacht." This on a ship that normally has a capacity of about 3,000 people. This was a good thing for our experience, but is obviously not sustainable for the cruise lines. Everywhere, there were signs of heightened cleaning of cabins, restaurants, and other public areas. Pretty much everywhere you went, there was at least one person wiping things down. When you walked into a restaurant, you were directed to stations to wash your hands, and they checked you in and out to limit the number of people in the space. In the buffet, there was no self-service. You handed your plate to a crew member, told them what you wanted, and they dished it up. And half the tables were marked as being off limits for social distancing, Although the same thing wasn't in place in the main dining room, which had all tables open, even though not all were needed because of the lowered number of passengers. In addition, behind the scenes, there were ramped up air filters, which had, for many cruise lines, been in place ahead of the pandemic to avoid problems like the norovirus, but which apply to COVID. In short, the steps that were put in place for our October cruise far outweighed anything put in place that you will experience at your local trip to a grocery store, employer, or any other public space. Yes, we were limited in our movements and interactions given that we were on a big cruise ship, but that's actually a good thing. If there was anyone on board with COVID, and there was not in our case, the cruise line would be able to contact, trace anyone who might have gotten infected. But none of that happened. We're a couple weeks out from our cruise. My wife and I are doing fine for having ignored the government's admonition against going on a cruise. We enjoyed our time on the Royal Caribbean Mariner of the Seas and look forward to our next cruise next month on the Norwegian Epic, a transatlantic cruise from Rome, Italy to New York City. Expect some reports from me as we move from the old world to the new. There's an update on the current state of cruising, a multi-billion-dollar industry in the United States that's just coming back.
Okay, well, the first thing I'd like to interject is they made everyone wear ID bands that were vaxxed, right?
Yes.
How many people did you personally see without the ID band, the armband?
A number of kids, probably 20 kids, and I did see 3 or 4 adults who did not have the wristband.
Okay, so that's out of 1,000 passengers on that particular cruise, there was 3 people that you saw. Now, obviously, you didn't go throughout the whole ship. Does all the crew members wear the ID bands?
No, all crew members, without exception, have to be vaccinated. They don't have to be per the CDC limit. I think it's 98% have to be, but for Royal Caribbean, they required all crew members to be vaccinated.
Okay, but they don't have an ID band, so it's only the passengers, and you had to wear masks. Did they wear the masks, the crew members?
Yes, crew members wore masks at all times.
Okay,
regardless of what
out
space
on the open sea, and you have to wear a mask, but everyone, 95% of the passengers have been vaccinated. So what's the purpose of the mask in nice weather on a cruise ship?
Well, again, if you're outside, you didn't need to wear a mask. So like when we went to the beach on their private island, you didn't have to wear a mask. If you're in closed spaces indoors, you had to wear the mask. And all crew, like I said, had to wear a mask at all times, even the ones who were, a bartender at the beach bar. They had to wear the mask, which that's fairly typical of a lot of businesses in Florida where they don't care if the customers are wearing masks, but they do require all of their employees to wear masks.
Yeah, well, wasn't Florida one of the states that had the easiest masking restrictions?
There's a state requirement that you cannot be mandated to have a mask by a government entity. So a school district, for example, cannot have a mask mandate, but private businesses are allowed to.
Okay.
See, to me, because where I live, they have to wear masks. My kids have to wear a mask.
Yeah, and on the cruise ship, the kids that were on board, and again, there weren't a lot of them, but the kids that were on board had to wear a mask whenever they were, inside. But if you're outside on the pool deck, you don't have to wear a mask, no matter whether you're vaccinated or not. The big benefit of being vaccinated really was the vaccination only areas of the ship. So, for example, we spent a lot of time in what was called the solarium, which is an area with a pool and a lot of chairs outside, but it's actually inside, and so that area was vaccinated only. So there was no kids in there. And if you didn't have a wristband, and you were doing something other than just walking through, a crew member would tell you that you had to leave.
Did you see anybody who had any problems with those sets of rules put in place? Did you see any people without a wristband having a problem with that?
No. The few people that I saw that didn't have wristbands, didn't seem to be, having an issue with it. It was a very pleasant cruise. I've been on cruises that were, very rowdy and a lot of rambunctious behavior and people doing things that they probably shouldn't. And there was really none of that. It was just, people having a good time and happy to be cruising again. I mean, if you're not a cruiser, it may not make, a whole lot of sense about how much this industry was missed for the last 17 months. And the crew were just so happy to be back to work because they had literally spent a year and a half of sitting on their hands in their home countries, in the Philippines or Indonesia or India, and they were just wildly enthusiastic. When we got on the ship, they were just like, "Oh, we're so happy to see you. Welcome back, and we're so happy to be here for you."
So
Okay, well,
the
go ahead, Solomon.
I'm sorry. So the use of the wristbands and the added rules didn't take away from the enjoyment or the fun level.
No, I don't think it did. I know it's not a lot of fun to wear a mask, and it can be a hassle. One of the things that was helpful was my wife had gotten these straps from her work. She's an activities director at a senior living facility here, and you put the straps on your face mask, and then when you want to take your mask off, you just pulled it down and it hung around your neck. And then when you wanted to put it back on, you just pulled it up and it was there. So you generally weren't running around going, "Oh, I don't know where my mask is," or getting it dirty or whatever. So that was a way that made mask wearing a lot easier.
People who didn't have a wristband didn't suffer. They still had venues and shows and stuff like that too.
Yeah. The way that it worked for the shows was the theater had two levels, on 3 and 4, and the vaccinated only area was on 3, and that was completely wide open. There was no social distancing between seats, and you didn't have to wear a mask. On deck 4, which was for the unvaccinated people, they had seats blocked off so you couldn't sit next to other parties. That's where the kids was up there. And I think they even had like the ice show. They have an ice show on the ship, and they had different seatings, or different shows, excuse me. And for the first show, which is the one we went to, was for vaccinated people only. And then the second show was for mixed. And in the second show, they enforced social distancing so people weren't on top of each other.
Okay, what I'm really curious about is, do you see this as some form of segregation? I mean, they used to have black and white, blacks use this restroom, whites use that restroom. Non-vaxxed and vaxxed have to sit in different areas and follow different protocols. Do you see it being a form of segregation in the future if you're unvaccinated?
No, I see it more of them trying to make accommodations for the unvaccinated people. I mean, they could have just Norwegian Cruise Line, which we're going to be on in November. They have 100% vaccination. You have to be vaccinated to get on a Norwegian ship. That means no kids at all, at least at this time.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody is on the ship is vaccinated, and they don't require any masks at all. Probably for the crew they do, but for the passengers they don't. So no, I see. I mean, if you're at the pool, you could have a vaccinated person sitting next to an unvaccinated person. It didn't matter. It was just in these particular areas that were designated as vaccinated only. And again, I see that as not really rewarding the vaccinated or penalizing the unvaccinated. It's just trying to accommodate the fact that some people, don't have the vaccine.
Okay, well, that's important there, because if they're trying to accommodate them, that's different than vac shaming,
Right, yeah, and I mean, it's not like if they had done the reverse, if they had said, if you're unvaccinated, we're giving you this bracelet so everybody knows that you're unvaccinated, I wouldn't be okay with that. The reality is the people that I saw that didn't have a wristband, maybe they took it off for some reason. Maybe they're vaccinated and then they took it off. And one thing that was kind of interesting is we did this as a back-to-back cruise. So we did a 4-day cruise, and then on the last day of the cruise, they escorted those of us who were doing the back-to-back, escorted us off the ship, went through customs, and right back on the ship. Took about 10 minutes. And we had to get COVID tested the day before the disembarkation, and the third day of the 4-day cruise. We had to get COVID tested. And then for the 3-day cruise, they gave us a different wristband. The first one was like a green rubber thing, and then the on the second cruise, it was a blue piece of cloth, basically. So they've thought it through to the extent of saying, hey, if you're on a ship and you get a wristband and you take it home and you give it to somebody, and then they get back on the ship and they're not vaccinated, well, it's not going to work, because they've changed the color of the wristbands, or they've changed the fabric of the wristbands. So they've really thought things through.
Huh. Okay, well, it's about time to wrap this topic up.
All right. Thank you for listening to this episode of Reality Remix. And again, if you like what you've heard, please consider subscribing with the notifications turned on.